My name is Lucille Zick, and I am filling in for Shaw today while she is in New York. This is awesome. Well, she's in New York. I'm the arts lecture series student intern for the year, who's been helping coordinate. This week we're in week 4. We are joined by Julia Rooney. Next art lecture series will be in week 6, in which we're joined by Ralph Puget, and then week 8, which we are joined by Evergreen's very own Miranda Mellis. Um, and now I would like to welcome Ash Mintz up to the podium to introduce Julia. Thank you so much for being here.
Hi, my name is Ash. I'm with Experiments in Culture in Olympia and New York City. We're so fortunate to invite Julia Rooney to speak with us today at Evergreen. Julia is a multidisciplinary artist whose work oscillates between digital and analog, often teasing the influence they have on one another. While depicting 21st century technology, her practice explores many disciplines, including painting, papermaking, and collaborations through the Postal Service. Much of Rooney's work draws on old world techniques, including cyanotype and hand stitching. She has been awarded prestigious residencies through the Joan Mitchell Center, Yale University Art Gallery, and the studios at Mass MoCA. Her work has been shown at galleries and institutions, including Jennifer Terzian Gallery, Arts and Leisure, Freight and Volume, and Art Space New Haven. Most recently, Feels Like in Bellingham with our own Shah Osha at Queen Projects, a collaboration based upon a mutual dedication to light. Each piece accentuates the space and texture in constant reference to one another. Before that, Tilt, currently at Yale Divinity School, depicting cyanotypes produced through the light of the window in Yale's Marcan Chapel, juxtaposing the light of autumn equinox and winter solstice. Bands of red, green, and blue are painted atop the linen in the shape of the chapel's windows, and if one shifts their gaze to a cyanotype, a prismatic afterimage appears on the surface of the print. Rooney received her BA in Visual and Environmental Studies from Harvard College and her MFA in Painting and Printmaking from Yale School of Art. In an interview with Harvard Magazine, Rooney cites, students are so hungry for validation and feedback. Some students, they just want to be told, is this right? Is this good? Is this not good? That's what's really hard, I think, as a young artist to sit with. No one can tell you if what you're doing is good or bad, or if it's worth pursuing or not. The only real person who should be answering that question is you. Art criticism can define moments and movements in time, and Julia's pieces push against this notion, allowing works to speak for themselves. In the information era, knowledge runs rampant, and to be audacious and explore the unknown, to present a viewer with feeling over empirical data, you are a pioneer creating worlds. And with that, we would love to hear firsthand about your experience and process. Julia Rooney.
Thank you so much for that very generous introduction. I didn't know what everything would be said, so I am so grateful to be here and really excited to share some work, but also hear from everybody about your questions, things you're going through in your own studio practice. So I hope we can, have a nice conversation after this. And I wish it were in person because that is my favorite way to engage. So I will just preface by saying that I come from a background of painting. But what I'm going to introduce today is really a mix of painting, writing, research projects, some video, and some pieces that involve technology. Um, and I really want to give insight not only into what the projects became in the world, whether that be a finished painting on the wall, an exhibition, but also where they came from, how they got to that place. Because I think that's something that often you don't get access to in an exhibition, where you don't get to see an artist talk to you or, understand exactly how this thing came to be. So I'm hoping that this lecture can provide some insight into that. And I'm going to start out actually with a video. This is a video from 2024, and it is part of an exhibition, which I will be talking a lot about in the beginning part of this lecture. I'm going to play the first 4 or so minutes of the video, and then I will jump into more about this exhibition. The name of the video is Walking Inside the Wedge Like a Leaf or a Clock Turning Back. And as context, the entire video is 31 minutes. I'm only going to play the first 4 minutes. So I will share my screen. And I will put it in full screen. And if there's any issue with sound, please let me know that. Okay. So, that is a video that I produced in collaboration with Anne Marie Rooney, who is my sister. And it was part of an exhibition that we mounted in 2024 at an artist-run gallery in Lower Manhattan called Below Grand. And I wanted to start out with that because, as I mentioned at the very beginning, I consider myself a painter, and yet I think of painting as really a center of focus from which I can move out and in and out and in. So it's like a center of gravity for me that always seems to ground what I do, but my interests extend far beyond that. And I will explain more about what that video was made using. Um, but I wanted to begin with just a few things that I have been reflecting on that are important to me as an artist. I don't think these are the same for everybody, so I don't take this for granted. That first of all, my body is one of the materials I enlist in the making of work. And in that example of the video, it's very physically my body. That was me walking a very unwieldy, heavy painting through the streets of New York over the course of 3.5 miles. So my body is a part of my making of work. Making work is work. So physically, it is actually physical labor. It can be tiring. So taking breaks is good. Things take time. I believe in patience, and I also believe in detours. You never know if the thing that you thought you were looking for might actually be on some tangent that takes you somewhere else. So I really believe that a practice should take a meandering path rather than a straight shot. I believe that when work enters the world, it is changed by everything that is around it. So you have certain intentions and beliefs and desires about what you want your work to be and what you think it's doing and what you think it's about. But once that work leaves you, the world has its own opinions about what it is and continues to change the meaning of that, both physically in terms of time, work can change and degrade, and I'm interested in the process of degradation in the making of an object, but that also pertains to ideas, of course, and audiences that will change the meaning of what a work is. And then finally, the way you get from A to B is as important as either one of those things. And I'll start out by saying, how does an artwork get from point A to point B? And again, I don't want to take as a given that point A means the same thing for me as it does for any of you. So one example in my own career, in my own life that I'm interested in is how does an artwork get from the studio where it's being produced to a gallery, which is one possible venue that your work can be shared with in the world. That's one of many. And it's not necessarily the one that you're interested in, but it's one that as a painter, I have been interested in over my career. So here is a picture of this artwork that you saw in the video in the studio. It's a double-sided screen. It folds. So you saw it both in a closed form, and then you saw me opening it up at various points. It is about 7 feet high, and each of those panels is about 3 feet wide. So the entire thing, if you were to open it up, is 7 feet by 6 feet, give or take. And what you're seeing also in the surface is little holes that are cut out and have stitching around the edges of them. And here it is in the gallery in which it was installed. So the picture that you see here gives the final version of it when it was in the exhibition. And here is another picture of it to show how it was installed in relationship to the room and with light coming through it. But the premise of the video was getting the artwork from my studio to this location on the Lower East Side on a street called Orchard Street. And when I said, how does an artwork get from point A to point B, from the studio to the gallery? I literally mean, how did this artwork physically get from the studio to the gallery? Not how did you get the show? Who invited you to do a show? How did that happen? But literally, how did this object move from one area to another? And that's something that I think a lot about. Because there is a huge industry around the shipping of art and the expense of art getting moved from point A to point B. So I was thinking about what if I were to physically move this piece myself? And the video shows a 3.5 mile walk of me carrying this painting through the city streets of New York. When it's installed, there's a projector that was installed behind the piece. You can see that it's a translucent work, and the little beads of light that are kind of being filtered around the room, kind of like a disco ball, are that projection light that is coming through the holes and casting little squares of light. And then the video itself is playing on the wall opposite the piece. So this was a tiny little gallery. There was no window. And there was the physical artwork, and then there was a video of the artwork. So it was kind of like a loop where you got to understand how it got there. On the right side of the wall in that picture, you see what looks like a stack of paper, and it is a stack of poems that were written by my sister Anne Marie. So this was a collaborative show, two-person show in which we both produced this video together and then individually had writing that was her own, as she is a poet, and paintings that I produced, which made some sense given that I am a painter. And then we had this piece together. One of the things we were thinking about with this show was also how does an artwork extend beyond the walls of the gallery and actually come to mean something to the community in which it is a part of. In New York, at least, there are some galleries that feel like they are kind of closed to the public in the sense that why would someone necessarily want to walk in there if they're not in the art field? And one of the things that's interesting to us is how can we kind of extend our audience beyond someone who we kind of know is already interested, and how can it be an opportunity for us to engage with people across a wide range of disciplines. So during the run of this show, which was up for about 5 weeks, we hosted a poetry reading in which we invited 4 poets to present their work, and we opened up the street of the gallery. And this is a shot showing Cecilia Vicuña on the left reading one of her works, and Anne Marie Rooney on the right reading one of her works. And it was really a very kind of informal event that we did with the means that we had available to us. So again, artist-run gallery, artists figuring out how to get it done. This particular gallery is unique because it is contained within another store. So you can see the name of the store is Japanese Restaurant Equipment and Food Wholesale. And at the right is this little storefront window space where artists can present projects that are available for viewing kind of 24/7 because of this storefront visibility that is afforded by the gallery. And then thinking about the question of how does an artwork go from just being an idea to the actual form that it takes. And that is something that I am deeply invested in, is process. And sometimes I actually think the process is more important than the product or the ultimate form. And one of the things that really informs my own process is the idea of source, having a source material in the world that I am researching in some way. So even though my work results in a painting sometimes, there is often this entire process of research and source material that is kind of gestating in my head before I get to the canvas to paint. So in the front of the gallery, there was this collection of paintings and some poetry. And again, in the back of the gallery was that video piece and the screen. And I'll just show you a few of these paintings up close to give you a sense of the kind of work that I make. on my own when I'm not necessarily collaborating. Um, so these are small oil paintings on linen. They are all mounted in frames that were all found. So these are frames that have had many past lives to them. And the paintings I made with that frame in mind. So often you frame something after the fact. But in this case, I started with the frame and the painting kind of developed within the frame rather than the frame coming after it. And one of the things that I feel is significant about this body of work that I always try to preface is the names of these pieces are lines from a poem that my sister wrote. The name of the poem is ESP, and I have included that poem on the right side of the screen with my own kind of marks. They're not edits. They look maybe like I'm editing her work, but I'm not. I'm actually circling things that stand out to me. I take great inspiration from poets, and I think that poetry and painting are actually two mediums that are perhaps closest in nature. And it's not a direct source that anyone would necessarily see in my work, but I would say it is there. So I share it with you all to just say that, again, you don't know where your inspiration may come from. And this poem was installed as part of the exhibition. So on the left, you see the way that it was installed on the floor of the gallery. It's kind of stacked along with some other pieces of text from her, and it's positioned in these pieces of rust that were also found. This is a picture of the work in process in a studio environment. This was a residency that Anne Marie, my sister, and I did together for the first time we were in a space, not as children, that we could produce our work. Again, not collaboratively necessarily, but in a shared working environment. So on the left, you can see her process of ordering the pages of a manuscript, and on the right, you see my paintings in process. And I would say that just again, the proximity of working with someone in a space can have a huge influence on the kinds of things that come out of you. So who you who you share space with, how you share space, how you what you see just on a daily basis, even in just the things that enter your subconscious, I think is super important to be mindful of. So all of these paintings were produced during this residency. Um, this is the picture I mentioned of the rust that became the kind of structure to hold the poem that she wrote. And these are some pictures of frames that I was uh, drawing from in producing these paintings. Another source of inspiration that I was thinking about in producing that screen, and also in this idea of taking a walk from one place to another and having that become a part of the art. This is a picture of the facade of a building in Greenwich Village that I passed every day as a child. And somewhere in my mind, perhaps this image was rooted. And you'll notice that on the right side of the screen, there is what kind of looks like a web or a pattern. Um, it's not an actual map, but I think there must have been something in me that was thinking about mapping, thinking about connections and like trajectories and ways of moving through the world. And this is a picture showing this screen being made in process. So what you'll see on the left is me making the print, which is in this case a cyanotype. Cyanotype is a type of analog photograph that is made using sunlight. So you produce an image on a photosensitized screen or surface, and it's basically what is exposed to the sun turns blue and what is covered remains white. So the left image shows the cyanotype being made in real time. It's being laid out in a parking lot, and then I have this like web that I made out of pieces of paper that I put over it. And then on the right, you see the first kind of pass of this print on those panels that eventually become the folding screen. This is the map of the walk that I took in that video. So the map is a loop. It is a 3.5 mile long walk, and it is going again from my studio to the gallery. So that was like the kind of destination or the goal. And what we did is we turned this walk into a kind of guide for the video's images that you might see having been spliced in. There were certain moments where the video kind of cut out from real time to these black and white images. And what those images were historic photographs of those streets that we were walking on. So part of what we were interested in this project was doing was kind of giving a history or a story of downtown Manhattan, which is where we grew up, and kind of giving some history of that, of those many neighborhoods, which include Tribeca, the Lower East Side, Chinatown, the Financial District. It's kind of like this web of neighborhoods that are all butting up against each other and that have changed a tremendous amount in the past 30 plus years of our life, but then obviously in the centuries of time that these streets were built. So what we did is we researched images from the New York Historical Society, and we intermittently spliced those historical images into the video at the moment that we were walking on those particular streets. And so that was kind of what you were seeing, that kind of glitchy keying in and keying out of black and white images. That was done in post-production, thinking about how there's like a kind of living reality that we were walking in, and then there was this kind of historic layered reality that was, that wasn't visible in real time, but that we edited into the video, into the final video. So I give this kind of introduction to say that, again, mediums are, I hope, always intersecting in my practice, that research is a big part of what I do, and that artist-run spaces allow you to experiment in ways that sometimes commercial spaces do not. So seek them out. And if you have an idea for your own space or your own show that you want to organize or curate, try to do it yourself, because you as artists have sometimes the best ability to make a project happen. Don't sit around waiting for someone to give you the opportunity. Take it into your own hands and manifest it yourself. So I'm going to just show a little bit about some of my my influences as a kid growing up, and some of the things that probably made me think the way I do, even though I don't necessarily always see that connection directly. So my father was an indexer. He writes indexes to books, which means that he reads a book before it has been published, and he writes the index. That is not done by a computer program like Google search. It's not done, by an algorithm. It's done by a person. And so this is just a picture showing a text before it's been published and him underlining words, and then those words going into the index that he produces. I also grew up in a time before cell phones were everywhere and before the internet was expected to be the way we communicate. So this is a picture of a Rolodex, which was an analog form of people having access to a telephone book, basically, of their own contacts. I was born in 1989, and I feel like that, that first decade and change of my life really change it's a part of how I think, but it's also a kind of a point of departure, I think, in how I'm now dealing with technology and its relationship to my art practice. Um, Also thinking about the process of searching for things physically in real space and time. So just the idea that when you go to a library, you're looking for one book, perhaps, but then there's all of these other books to the left and right that you weren't necessarily looking for, but that might be of interest. Um, and again, the idea of going to a library to find images rather than searching on Google or searching on Instagram for images. What kinds of images are not necessarily going to show up in an algorithmic search? So this is a picture of the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and their slide library, which used to contain all of their images in the museum. It used to be a physical collection of slides. Um, and I worked at the Met for 5 years while they still had this. They no longer do. It has been converted into a complete digital archive. But I include it to just say all of this came before Google search. And the past, I would say, 6 or so years, the idea of um, how you navigate a place and how you find images and how you process those images and what images are fed to you has been a real topic of interest to me as a painter. Um, so this is, just a Google picture of Paris, and I'm much more interested in a map that would be a more subjective understanding of what a place is rather than something that is presumably objective, but obviously is nothing is objective. Um, so these are just some alternative ideas of mapping that have informed the way I think about, um, again, documenting and navigating place, a sense of place. Some of the books that I've been thinking about um, in this research that I'm doing, again, all of this is happening outside of my painting practice, but is happening simultaneous with my painting practice. This book, The Age of Surveillance Capitalism, which really details like a history of Google and search engines. Algorithms of Oppression, another book that talks about again how we are fed content. And all of this kind of led me to a project that did occur in the studio. So I'm going to show a few paintings that are all from the year 2020 and 2021. These are oil on canvas or oil on linen, respectively. Um, and in these paintings, I'm thinking about framing devices. I'm thinking about networks and bits of data and webs. Um, but the most important thing probably to me about these paintings is how big they are. So this is a series of 2 inch by 2 inch paintings. And when I produced this work, they were going to a show at a small gallery in New York City. Um, and it was the height of the pandemic. So a lot of people were not viewing art in person. And I wanted there to be, and specifically, they were not viewing art in person, but they were viewing art on their phones. So there was this real, as you know, immersion in the digital world. And Instagram, I would say, became one of those chief places that people were going to look for art and post their work. And I wanted to create an exhibition that called into question what one's viewing experience is and how that is different when you experience something online versus when you experience something in person. So the whole show consisted of these tiny 2 inch paintings, and I installed them in a very traditional, like average viewing height form. It was a painting show, but the experience of seeing them in real life differed greatly from the experience of seeing them on your phone. And for those people who only saw them on Instagram, um, would probably think they were normal size paintings, whatever normal means in this world, but paintings that were 3 feet by 3 feet or 6 feet by 6 feet. Um, and then for people who saw them in person, they would have this very different bodily experience of the work. And for people who saw both, they would kind of understand the disconnect between what the tiny world in our hands is when we're looking at a phone and what the world is more broadly. Um, One thing that was also important to me, again, was engaging the passersby on the street. So, again, how can you invite people to go into a gallery if it's not the kind of thing that they're inclined to do? Like, how do you just have the average person on the street who's passing by be curious, like what's going on in that space? So I painted this QR code, which hung in the window. And if someone scanned the QR code, it would take them to Instagram where they could see all of these 2-inch paintings on their phone. So there was this built-in digital experience of the show at the same time that I was inviting and hoping that people would have this physical experience of the show. And of course, this was also at a time where QR codes became like just common everywhere. So it was also kind of playing with the technology that had suddenly become very, very daily. Um, I played with ways to hang the paintings that were not just traditional at eye height, but also playing with the architecture of the space, the kind of funkiness and the nuances. So I hung things up high and down low. Again, really trying to engage with this idea that these exist in a real architecture, and the architecture of the room was not, perfect. It had these kind of funny qualities about it. At the same time, I was making really big paintings. So this show was miniature work, but I was also making 6-foot paintings that were versions that were, again, like real life size paintings of these small works. So here's the 2-inch work, and here is the kind of the big work that I made. So I was constantly kind of working between these two scales and trying to think about what the difference between one's body relationship to something and then the way things get distorted when they get put onto a screen. So this is a 2-scale version, or spread, showing the 6-foot painting on the left and then the 2-inch painting that I made on the right. Another example of these two things getting kind of installed in a way. This was an exhibition I did in 2023 at a gallery in Tribeca, which is in downtown Manhattan. And what I wanted for this gallery experience for people was that they had to go up close and they had to step back in order to see the full range of this work. So that this is a view, again, showing the kind of disparate scales, from 6 feet to 2 inches. And then these are close-ups, which are all kind of at the same scale on your screen. You're all experiencing this on a screen. So this is, the same size, as this is proportionally as that. And this is a view of them all together. Um, you may notice that there is this kind of constant, kind of like unit of measurement, which is that 2-inch unit of measurement. So in all of these pieces, I'm kind of playing with that 2 inches as a common denominator. And it starts to repeat itself throughout the projects that I've been working on for the past 3 or so years. So I'm going to finish with an exhibition that I had in LA in 2023, which again was coming out of the idea of a painting is so often the subject of a photograph. When a painting is documented, it is the subject, and we get to experience only one version of it as in photographic form. And I started to think about what would it mean for a painting to kind of be the author of its own photograph? What if a painting was not just being photographed, but what if a painting could kind of create a photograph of itself? Metaphorically, like what would it mean for a painting to give birth to its own image? Um, and so that was the sort of premise of this show. The entire show came out of this structure, which you're seeing here. It's again a screen. It's a two-sided screen that was installed in the gallery in three-dimensional space. So it wasn't hanging on a wall as a painting traditionally is. The little cutouts you're seeing are in fact holes. They're all 2-inch holes. It's an oil painting on the surface, but then I basically punctured the oil painting, and there are all these kind of areas that you can see through. The painting was the 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 kind of basis for all of the other work in the show to come about. And when I installed it in the gallery, I wanted that connection to sort of be clear. So the painting that you see on the left is a hybrid of a photographic print and an actual oil painting. The process of cyanotype, as I mentioned a little earlier, is one in which a light sensitive surface, in this case, it was a piece of canvas or linen that I had photosensitized with chemicals. When it is exposed to the sun or to any UV light source, it starts to develop as a photograph would. And this was an analog form of photography invented in the 1860s, and it was used primarily for botanical prints. So if you've ever seen, like very beautiful prints of algae or flattened flowers, and it has this very rich blue color, that was the kind of traditional way that cyanotypes were used. But I started thinking about cyanotype as a way to create, again, a photograph in a very embodied way. And the image you see here is a picture of this screen casting a shadow on a photosensitized piece of fabric and producing a photograph of it, basically. So the painting is giving 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 or bearing a photograph out of its own structure. So when I installed the work in this gallery, I wanted there to be a kind of hint at how this was done. So this screen was installed with natural light that, cast a shadow on the wall, and then nearby it was this painting, the middle portion of which is the cyanotype print, and then the top and the bottom portions are painted in oil. There is a lot of manual assembling in this work. There's, again, the kind of moment of the photograph being made, but then there's also stitching work that puts these pieces into the form that they end up. There's painting work, so they're really hybrids, I would say, of being photographs and also being paintings. Here's an installation view just to give you a sense of their scale. Every one of them is different, and to some degree you can tell what that original structure was, and in others it becomes much more abstracted or distant. Again, here is a view showing their scale and their relationship to each other. And that motif of the 2 inches is kind of also moving throughout. Might be hard to tell, but there are physical canvases that have been kind of glued onto the surface of the piece, so they're very tactile. I was thinking again about how can you uh, how can you kind of translate some of the photo editing processes that have become so common in places like Photoshop, like cutting, splicing, cloning, repeating, um, all of these kind of gestures that we do when we edit an image in Photoshop? How can I actually physically do those things in the making of a painting? And in the work, not trying to ever, uh, I never want the work to be didactic or to be too uh, assertive of its position. I mean, my position is my position, but I want the work to basically be an invitation for people to consider their own relationship to these processes. And then outside of the gallery, again, this idea of how do you engage people who are walking by on the street or who may not want to walk into the gallery because they don't know what it is, or they don't know what the show is. So I had this QR code piece, and the QR code was, again, an invitation for people to get a little bit of insight or clue into what they would find inside if they did decide to go through the door of the gallery. So what I'll show is what this QR code leads to. So you probably all could scan this QR code on your phone right now from the screen, and it would take you to a link. And the link that it takes you to is here. So I'll play this short video. So that is a video showing the actual production of this piece. The way this cyanotype was made was a photosensitive piece of canvas I prepared, and then I organized tiny squares of paper on the surface of the canvas in the pattern of a QR code. And I let those squares sit on the surface for a long enough time in the sun for the canvas to start to undergo this development process. And you're watching in real time the pieces of paper getting broomed away, and then me washing out the cyanotype, which is the way you basically fix the image. And that result is what the final piece is. So it's, again, it's a reflexive process where you see this finished result, but I also want people to understand how you got to that finished result, this kind of cycle, which, I hope is generous to the viewer. I hope it is something that a viewer can kind of get a clue into what a making process looks like. I'm going to share one last project, and I'm going to stop sharing for 1 minute and open up another file. Because it was mentioned in the introduction, and I didn't actually include it here, but I think that it might be nice to include a few images of what this project was. So I'm going to share one more time. And here it is. So the last project that I'll talk about, and again, this was mentioned in the introduction. It's a project that's currently up on view at the Yale Divinity School, and it's a large-scale cyanotype uh, installation. Here are a few images showing the work installed. And the way these images were produced were by spending a period of time in a chapel space that is part of the campus community. And I visited this chapel during two important moments of light passing through. I went during the fall equinox and also during the winter solstice. And I brought these pieces of photosensitized linen into the space, and then I chased the light. Literally, I moved throughout the space as the light was moving, and I tried to find moments of light casting shadow. And I captured these moments on the fabric, and then on site washed the fabric out. And these are the kind of raw prints before they become, stretched and mounted in more of a traditional format. But it was really a project that was about responding to environmental conditions, being very, being almost like the orchestrator of something, but not doing too much to impose my own hand or my own will, which I think is one of the hardest things as an artist to, again, have your own uh, vision or intentions for a work, and then how do you step out of that and let the work become what it is, and how do you kind of remove yourself from the process and let the work be. So this again was a collaboration, I feel, with a space, with light that was passing through that space at a very particular time, and a significant time in the kind of rotation um, of the Earth. And these are the finished prints that were then stretched onto canvas or to stretcher bars. And the edges I painted with bands of red, green, and blue, which are the primary colors of light. So I was thinking again about the kind of the components of light that are in my brain or are kind of factual, and then the kind of more ephemeral qualities of light and the emotional qualities of light and the spiritual qualities of light, and kind of having these two things meet in the space of a canvas. We're just at about 3:30, so I want to make sure that we have enough time for questions, but also I can share a few more projects if that would be of interest. So maybe I'll pause here, and if there are questions that come up right now, we can start a dialogue, and if not, then I would be happy to share one more project that involves cyanotype specifically. So does that sound okay? I can stop my share, or I can keep it up.
Yeah, I have a couple of questions here in the Q&A. I just want to say, first of all, thank you so much for sharing your work with us. Super, super interesting. And I definitely have some questions that are still percolating, but I just want to say to the folks that are in the room here, normally when we have someone on Zoom, we'll invite people to come up to the podium with any questions that they have. If you're not able to, I'll have a mic and I'll keep an eye out for folks who might not be able to come down. But to get started, we have a question from Ray Zill. It says, "Hey Julia, this is Ray, the Arts and Humanities librarian here at Evergreen. Thank you for being here and mentioning the library as a source of inspiration and research for artists. I appreciate your comments on how we access images in our current digital dense information age, and I wonder if you'd be willing to share some of your favorite image sources outside of Google and Instagram."
Yes, yes, I'm happy to share that. Um, I'm actually going to stop my share so that maybe I'm bigger on the screen. I don't know if that matters to you all, but um, yeah. So I did a project at the picture collection, the New York Public Library's picture collection, which is, if you ever are curious about the ways that images were organized and still are in this particular collection, I highly recommend it. I know that some of you are coming to New York next week for a trip. So this is a resource that is open to the public. You go to the New York Public Library on 42nd Street and Bryant Park. It's like the center of Manhattan. And the picture collection is a library of images that have been collected um, over decades that are organized by subject. So if you are like, what does a dog look like? You find the file that is labeled dog, and there is a folder of printed out images of dogs that have been sourced from all kinds of places, from magazines, newspapers, encyclopedias, like all kinds of places. It's a curated collection. So the librarian over many decades has been collecting images. So it's kind of like the original version of Google image search. Um, and it's, it's limited because it is one person or a collection of people's decisions about what they think a dog should be represented as. And that's just one category, right? Like you could look up pictures of like New York City subway. You could look up pictures of forests. Like there's a huge index of word searches that you can look for. Um, but I think it's a really valuable uh, tool to have a source that has not been designed by an algorithm, i.e., a company that basically wants to sell you something, right? Like that is how searches are basically designed, is with commerce in mind. Um, and what does it mean to kind of do a search that is not beholden to those forces? Um, I think libraries and museums have made a really great effort to digitize their collections. And I'm not a library scientist, so I do not, or a librarian or anything. I do not know how these spaces have been organized. But I think if you talk to someone, if you go to a library and you physically just have a conversation with someone, like it is one of the most tremendous resources that you have available to you as a student. And then also, in a city, I'm sure every city has some version of library that has been thoughtfully curated. Um, so I'll leave it at that for now.
Great, thank you. And then I have one more from one of our viewers in the Zoom, and then I'll open it up to the room. Dawn asks, "One of those last largest paintings in LA that sort of has two building-like figures and a yellow essence between them. Did you intend or realize how it sort of resembles Klimt's The Kiss? Not only
Mm.
visually, but there's this theme I've really enjoyed seeing of personification and almost autonomy to art."
Mm. Um, I love when people see references to other things that I did not intend or see. Um, yeah, those pieces from the LA show are they're not representational in any way. I was not looking at any kind of source. Um, but again, like the things that were kind of in my brain, I was thinking about uh portals, about windows, about screens, about webs, about landscape, about environments that we navigate through as, as physical beings. So I'm always curious when people see things that were not necessarily on my mind, but might be there anyway.
Great, thank you.
Hi there. Really appreciate the talk and your work. I was curious about how you chose the route for carrying the screen. I noticed that you referenced Guy Debord, so I was wondering if that route was reference to psychogeography or perhaps derive or situationist inspired. Thanks.
Yes. Yes, thank you for that question. So definitely, so just a little bit of background as an undergrad, I studied visual and environmental studies, which is a long, convoluted name for studio art. I was a painter, um, but one of the classes I took really got me thinking about, how can you represent a place in ways that are more about like psychogeography, which I think you just used that word. I spent a lot of time in Italy as an undergraduate student on research projects, and uh, I was creating paintings of Italian spaces, but I didn't want them to be just straight up representational paintings. And so I really started to think again about like how can you map a place according more to memory and emotion and the kind of idea of the derive or the kind of the walk that one wanders on to understand a place. Maybe I'll share that image again just so that people know what I'm talking about as a visual reference. Um, wait, no, I think that's the other. Stop share. What do we want to do? Oh, I think my screen is frozen, actually. I can't see. I have another image. Can folks hear me at this point, or is it frozen?
Yeah, we can hear you just fine.
Okay. My screen is frozen on another image, which I'm trying to get out of because I can't see
Yeah,
this.
we're just seeing the pink wall with the blue cyanotype QR code image.
Okay. I don't know why it's not letting me. I'm gonna try to pause this. I might get booted out because my screen happens to be frozen on another image, but if I get booted out, we'll try this again. Okay. Okay. Well, I'm glad we're still on the call because my phone my image was totally frozen. Okay, let me close this. Okay. Yeah, so um so yeah, the situationists I learned about in college, in undergrad, which was like now over 15 years ago, but still thinking about them and kind of taking a traditional map of a city and cutting it up and kind of turning on its head the idea of trying to get to a place, trying to get to a destination as though it's a goal, and then seeing instead what would happen if you go on a walk kind of without an intention or a purpose in mind. Um, and that was very much the I would say the ethos or the kind of the mentality that drove my sister and I to do this project. We grew up in Lower Manhattan and we uh wanted there to be some element of like absurdity about the walk. Like there is an element of humor in the video. At certain points, I drop the thing. I am not acting at all. I'm literally carrying like a 40 plus pound unwieldy object, and my body can't always handle it. So it falls or it kind of opens up in a way. And that was, I guess, part of why I started with this initial slide, in which I said, my body is one of the materials I enlist in my work is my body. And I believe that as a painter, like there are things that happen that we don't always control. Um, and then the walk itself was dictated again by the goal of trying to get to the gallery, but also these images that we had researched, of historic photographs of these streets that we were walking on. So I don't know if that answers the question. Here, I'll show back to this image of the streets that we walked on. And this was also at the gallery for people to see, so they could, see this map, but they could also see the names of the streets, and they could also then see the sources of these particular images that we were including in the video. I'd actually play more of that if folks want to see it in the background. It's 30 minutes.
Hi, Julia. Thank you so much for being with us today and speaking and sharing your work with us. I was really inspired by how you use your own body and the relationship, not only of like how your body is used to create the piece, and also how you want others to like communicate with your work as well. Something that also interested me is I kind of just learned how to cyanotype a couple months ago, and it took me a while to like get into it, and like thinking of it like a painting with layers helped a lot. But I would love to know kind of like your history of how you first interacted with it, and how you've kind of explored it yourself. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that question. I the first time I ever tried cyanotype was in 2022, and I'll just go back to this image showing it. Sorry for the constant movement of images. So yeah, this was the first time I'd ever used cyanotype, and was never taught how to do it, was not in a photography class or anything like that. I learned it totally from reading books, and watching some online videos, and buying the materials myself, and producing like I basically produced the chemicals on a large scale. When you buy them as like these tiny little bottles, you get very little. So I bought the raw powder, which is basically, it's for those who have never done cyanotype, it's two kinds of iron salt. They come in powdered form, and you mix them yourself as two solutions. When you combine the solutions, they have a reaction that creates a photosensitized surface on anything that is organic. So you can use fabric, you can use wood, you can use ceramic tile. Um, and I was really trying again to answer this question for myself of what would it mean for a painting to make a photograph of itself rather than to be the subject of a photograph. And I wanted to create as many kind of versions or offspring or like products of this one freestanding screen as I could. And um my feeling about cyanotype is that it's a really forgiving medium because Um, you can do it outside. You don't need like a dark room. You don't need a really controlled environment. It's an environment, it's a medium that you can experiment with um, at fairly low expense. If you buy this material in bulk, it's really not that expensive. So I feel like with some photographic processes, and especially if you've ever used film, there's, a huge like kind of hurdle you have to get over. When you think about messing up, you got to learn a lot and it costs a lot to then do a lot of like practice runs. So cyanotype allows for a lot of kind of like experimentation at low cost. It's not toxic compared again to other photographic materials. And then when you're actually doing the painting on the fabric uh, to initially prepare it, you can, I mean, that is essentially an act of painting. Like the preparation process is part of the creative process. Um, so yeah, I would say it checks a lot of boxes for me. Um, one other project I can share that I've done with cyanotype, which I didn't include, but maybe is of interest. I had a few images um, on the screen before, and I'll I will share those because it's just again another project that was gestating in me probably for many years before I actually did something with it. So when I graduated from undergrad, the first job I got was working at the Met, the Metropolitan Museum of Art. And um, I mention that to say that you never know what a job will lead to in your creative practice. Sometimes you take a job just because it helps you pay the bills, it's a consistent paycheck, and it is, what you got to do. But don't ever like close the door to what creative things might come in. I always say like things come in the back door, not always the front door. The front door is what you're looking at, and the back door is like all these other sources that are like in the periphery. So when I was working there, one of the things that happened is the museum dismantled their slide collection. So all of the tiny 35 millimeter slides, which are the things that you see on this screen, that was how the entire museum's collection had been preserved. And in 2013, they were like, this is taking up a lot of space. We want to digitize everything. So they threw away literally millions of slides. And um, some departments got the slides. They threw away a lot. They gave away some. I got this random cross section of slides from the Met, and I would say slides have been a kind of a reference point for me for a long time. They also, if you notice, are about the size of a 2-inch square. So maybe that is also in my subconscious something about that scale. So a few years ago, I started, not a few years ago, like last year, I started kind of riffing off the idea of a 35 millimeter slide. And so these are these tiny little cyanotypes that I made um, on cotton, on canvas. And what they're made from is miniature paintings that I produced on pieces of um, glass slide. So the left hand that you see is me holding a glass slide, and the right hand is me holding the resulting cyanotype. So I started making these like tiny little ink paintings on um, a blank slide and then producing paintings of them or producing cyanotypes of them. So it's again like painting, cyanotype. What's the kind of line between them? Hopefully it's somewhat blurry. Here's a picture of the process happening in the sun where I've put these slides onto the fabric and they are getting developed. Um, and then eventually, when I had a lot of them, I mounted them as an exhibition. So this is just showing them kind of as an assemblage on the wall. And again, thinking about photography, painting, the blurriness between them. Thank you for that question. I don't know if it answers what you were thinking about, but experiment. Like that is my
Thank you.
takeaway.
Oh yeah, thank you so much. I actually like was just painting a shirt with cyanotype before I came here, so this has been really inspiring. Thank you.
Yeah.
I have a question from Shaw, wondering about collaboration and how you relate it to some of your other processes that are like a combination of gesture and hands off, working with structure and constraints, and are by individuals but not. That was the question,
Yeah.
roughly
Hi,
formulated.
Shaw. Hi, Shaw, and thank you for inviting me to be here. Um, and thank you everybody for your questions so far. Um, so Shaw and I are engaging in a collaborative project now, or we have been for the past few months, and it's on view in an exhibition up in Bellingham, Washington. Um, and that project, and I would say all collaborations, I think it's really good to start with maybe a premise and um, some kind of structure that allows for both like a boundary or like a space to work within, but also doesn't dictate too much because I think maybe the most essential thing about a collaboration is that it's about like change, not knowing, not being able to control things yourself because you're inherently in a relationship. So it's dynamic and it's probably going to evolve again from that initial like seed of an idea into the thing that it becomes. I think it's the most like in a way radical way to work because you are not only in dialogue with a material, you're in dialogue with a person, you're in dialogue with a space. It's it's a liberating feeling and it is also, I think, really hard. And I think that it's sometimes especially hard to do in like a school environment because I think so often there's like this focus on the individual and like what you do is the thing that gets, you know, talked about or graded or whatever it may be. Um, but I think it's like also the most wonderful thing to do in the context of an academic or school program. Um, and that was, I would say that was actually one of the things that I most cherish about my own graduate school is I had this opportunity to collaborate with one of my classmates and we basically spent a month writing letters to each other and then it became part of our thesis exhibition, which uh, I don't think faculty knew what to do with in some respects. Like I think again the focus is always on the individual and I think that it kind of was like confusing for faculty to be like, well, how do we talk about you as like a different entity because you're a third entity when you're making something with another person. It's like it's neither of you, it's a third thing. Um yeah, your friends, your peers, like they are the people who you are going to make the world as you see it in the time after school. Like you're gonna be with each other and what, so yeah, collaborate is, I think, just the best way to do that in some respects. I don't know if I answered the question again. I feel like I'm kind of rambling on about various projects, but
No, that's great. And that actually, I have a follow-up question from me. I'm really curious about like a lot of your work seems to sort of have like an undertone of like granting agency to the viewer or agency to the pieces that you're making. Like, you highlighted the importance of process in your work, and like so much of that is shaping this thing that doesn't yet exist, right? And so I'm curious about, yeah, I guess in your own words, like how you see your role as like creative of your pieces or steward of your pieces or keeper of your pieces, or what that sort of relationship looks like, and how much uh yeah, just like how power flows between you and the things that you're making.
Hmm. That's very well said. How power flows through. Um, I think one of the biggest privileges is to, speaking of collaboration, is to get a chance to work with an individual who might call themselves a writer, a curator, someone who is not you, who does something else in a different medium that engages your work. So it is it is so valuable, I think, once your work leaves your studio to invite another person who has a specialty in another thing. Maybe it's curating, maybe it's writing, maybe it's a totally different field altogether. And for that person to write about or organize or see your work in their own discipline. Um, I I think as like a living artist, you always will have things to say about your work, but your words are only going to last as long as they last, and then the world is going to decide what the work is actually doing in 20 years or 50 years, hopefully, if the work survives, right? Like that's the goal, that's the vision, is that it would survive. Um, but I think if you can engage another person in, again, like talking about writing, organizing in space, putting your work into dialogue with other work that you didn't know about, like that is such a privilege. And I just, I want to encourage anybody to do that um, when it, after it leaves your hands. Um, just asking someone like, what do you think? Would you be interested in like engaging with me in this? And maybe that's just a studio visit. Maybe it's just having someone over to your studio. Maybe it doesn't have to be like a public format that is exhibition or printed or anything like that. Like I think just getting voices into the room helps make the work, I guess, fully mature into what it is. Um, Yeah. And that it's not always helpful, I don't think, when you're making the work to have voices in the room. I think that was actually one of the hardest things for me as a student was like too many voices, and like actually you can't really say no to those voices because they're your faculty, they're your teachers. Like you can't actually say no like enough, but sometimes that's kind of what you need to say. So when you're out in your own practice in the world, continuing to do what you do, then you get to choose who gets to come into my studio. When do they get to come into my studio? And you have agency in that. And I think that's super important, is setting those boundaries and being like, I don't think this is going to be useful for you to come by today. So let's reschedule in a month. Like knowing that for yourself is like so hard and so important.
Great, thank you. I think we have time for one more quick question, if anyone has one in here. Yeah.
I've really been enjoying this talk. You said something almost at the very beginning. I've been very inspired by poetry in my work, and I was really curious if you'd elaborate on how you described that there was a commonality or a similarity between poetry and painting. I kind
Mm,
of sort of get what you're saying on some kind of subconscious level, but I'd love to hear you talk more on that.
yeah. Um, so I think poetry is not prose. Well, poetry, there can be poetry that reads more like prose, but I guess the kind of poetry I'm talking about, um, I don't think poems need to, I think poems start out with a very humble premise. I don't think that they have as their goal a a need to convince people of an argument. They're not structured in general, and this is a generalization, but I would say like the spirit of a poem is not to get a thesis across. The spirit of a poem is almost like, here is one thing, let it wash over you, let it do what it does, and then move on. It's a humble but very complex form of art. And I think that there's also very little room in a poem for extra stuff. A poem is often a very condensed, consolidated, pure amount of language on a page. And that's also a way in which it's humble. It's not 300 pages to try to get you something. It's like sometimes like 100 words. And it's like, what can you do in 100 words? That is really, really hard. And I think a painting struggles or is challenged to kind of communicate in the same way. A good painting, in my opinion, is just what it needs to be and nothing more. And a painting doesn't need to do everything. It doesn't need to tell you A, B, C, D, E, F. It doesn't need to go everywhere. It can go to one place. And that can then lead you to a whole other world, you know? But basically, I think in it's like its potential humility and also in its like ability to be direct and not have excess stuff in it. I think the two are very aligned, or at least I aspire to make a painting that is like that. Don't know if I always succeed, but that is what I hope for my painting to be. And as a viewer, that's what I want to look at.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Julia. Thank you for joining us and sharing about your work. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed this. So thank you.
Take care.
Bye.